This time on Poll Hub, bleak. It's an apt description of Americans' views of President Biden's first year in office. What does it mean as the president addresses the nation in next week's State of the Union? We break down our brand new NPR PBS NewsHour Marist Poll results. Then, point, counterpoint. We continue our discussion about the COVID-era workplace changes for low-wage workers. But we're going to zero in on a different side of the story this week. Sociologist Dr. Kristen Harknett of the University of California, San Francisco is here to share her research. And Lee's fun fact may have you singing a different tune the next time you buy concert tickets. This is Poll Hub. Let's get to it. And hi, everyone. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Mary Griffith, sitting in for Jada Dapper today.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho.
And I'm Lee Marengoff.
Welcome, Mary. You're going to be joining us for the next couple of weeks as Jay is doing a little globe trotting, hopefully to warmer climates. At least that's the rumor. So welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
As we record today, Russian President Putin has launched an attack on Ukraine, with the Wall Street Journal reporting that Russian airstrikes have hit dozens of Ukrainian cities. The unprovoked attack has been certainly broadly condemned by the international community. The stock markets have been quite rocky today in the last dozen hours or so. And also, not only have the stock markets plummeted, but oil has hit $105 a barrel. At least that's what it is as of this recording. So we are going to talk about our latest poll with our partners, PBS NewsHour and NPR. But before we do that, I would like to just get your reactions to what's happening in Ukraine. People have been comparing this to the start of another world war, perhaps minimally a return to a Cold War. Is this hyperbole, or should we have real concern?
Well, I would just say that, I think it's definitely destabilizing Europe in ways that haven't happened in decades, if not all the way back to World War II. But I think it's probably a little hyperbole to try to go all the distance and talk about the start of a war and a more extensive war involving other nations. Right now, we're not at that point. We're still at a United Nations diplomacy while the attack is occurring, trying to, get out from underneath this. The one thing I've been watching is that, as they say, I'm old enough to remember when politics stopped at the water's edge. And one of the things that's interesting in all this, of course, is the relationship of Donald Trump, former president, to Vladimir Putin, and how he's gotten on to Fox News and basically saying this is all the product of a rigged election. And he went right back into that. Other Republicans are following that line of reasoning. A lot are not. And so it's kind of interesting to see just to what extent the Republicans are going to rally around the flag and support the Biden policy, or, believe it or not, be more sympathetic to Vladimir Putin, which is like, wake me up from 50 years ago. One would never think we get to that point.
Well, but, our foreign policy has changed with a focus on China economically and away from Russia, particularly during the Trump campaign. I was going to say the Russian administration. Mary, I guess that was a bit of a Freudian slip.
Well, I think it's certainly unpredictable, to say the least. And with Vladimir Putin, I think that definitely characterizes him well, which is unpredictable. And it certainly muddies the water for Joe Biden, who has his hands full with lots of domestic policy issues. And now we're looking abroad, and he has to handle this very severe foreign policy and diplomatic issue as well. And what we're seeing in our latest NPR PBS NewsHour national poll numbers is that it's a very dark picture for President Biden coming out of his first year as he prepares to address the nation in his State of the Union next week. His approval rating overall, as well as on specific issues, are at new lows. And folks aren't really too thrilled with how he's handling the situation with Ukraine as well.
He's underwater on that one. I think the numbers are only 34 approve overall and 50% disapprove. And this was prior the bombing last evening. Lee, we've talked about Biden, his middle name probably being crisis, because it seems as though this administration is going from one crisis to the next crisis. State of the Union, tall order.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he has to find a way to forge a new message because clearly people feel that the first year in many ways has been squandered. And that includes a lot of Democrats at his base. The good news is, of course, Democrats are the easiest for him to win back. But as far as Republicans, clearly there's no sympathy there for President Biden. And in terms of independents, also a group that's would loom large in a midterm election, and that becomes problematic for him as well because his numbers are really low. We are watching also a group that's very important electorally, and that are women in the suburbs. That's sort of been the swing group dating back to the soccer moms of a couple of decades ago. And that is a group that right now, with the exception of his announcing that he's going to pick a Black woman to be on the Supreme Court, that's the only thing that seems to be getting a positive reaction across the board from a lot of voters, including these independent and suburban women. But aside from that, as Mary said, this is a tall order for him indeed. And everything's happening right now about the economy with Ukraine looming larger and larger. And clearly by next week, it will be presumably even more of a story than it is even right now.
Biden, was really elected, because of the coronavirus, Trump's handling on it, his, promise to dig us out. Most Americans actually think the pandemic is behind us. So not getting the credit or just moving on to the next bad news. Mary, we want to jump in on that one?
Well, I think it's difficult to say. History always remembers presidents more fondly as we come out of these different situations. So I think right now we have a situation where folks aren't, happy with the current situation. As we're seeing in our poll numbers, they're focusing more on pocketbook issues. They're focusing more on inflation. That's the top issue. That's the priority that Americans want the president to be focusing on right now. They're moving away from the coronavirus pandemic. And so I think it is really, I hate to use the term, but I think it really is a very much a wait and see situation for President Biden in terms of the court of public opinion. I think that we're going to see what happens as the Ukraine situation develops. He may get a boost on that front. We're also going to have to see what the spring brings in terms of COVID. Or have we really turned the corner? Are we really coming out of it, as more than 7 in 10 Americans think that we are doing right now, according to our most recent survey. So I think, right now, Biden is not seen as a positive force in the nation, but, as we like to say, polls are a snapshot in time. So what we're seeing now in this picture may change in the next days, weeks, and months ahead.
I would just add is that what strikes me is that he's not very good at getting credit for what he's done. And he's certainly gets into trouble for things that go bad. So there's a messaging issue, not only a reality issue, but a messaging issue. And taking the economy, for example, inflation, that's what people are thinking on. The jobs picture with low unemployment is not, or there are big growth numbers, is not where the public is focused. So things that are going well, he doesn't seem to be getting credit for. But when something doesn't go well, and there's a lot of that, he certainly, gets the blame.
Well, now we'd like to zero in on the economy and continue the discussion last week that we had regarding the changes in the workplace for low-wage workers. And our fans of Poll Hub will recall that we discussed the gains for low-wage workers that have come out of this COVID era. But there is a different side of the story. And to discuss that, we are joined now by Dr. Kristen Harknett. She is a professor of sociology at University of California, San Francisco, and also the co-founder with Daniel Schneider from Harvard University of the Shift Project, which is the largest source of data on work scheduling for hourly service workers. Welcome to Poll Hub, Dr. Harknett.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So you have, as I mentioned, a little bit of a different view in terms of this impact on low-wage workers during the COVID pandemic. And it has a lot to do in terms of scheduling. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, I would be happy to. The Shift project has been really focused on work schedules since way before the pandemic. We started collecting data from thousands of workers back in 2016. And we were then able to look at their work scheduling conditions year after year leading up to the pandemic, but also during the pandemic. And what we saw was that although service sector workers took on this newfound appreciated role of essential workers during the pandemic, their routine instability in their work schedules really didn't budge during the pandemic. These workers continued to face many fluctuations in the days and times that they were going to work, and many changes at the last minute, which make it very, very difficult to plan your life.
Yeah, I think that was that last point I found very interesting is that, the COVID was unpredictable enough to our lives and disruptive enough, but you're talking about this group of workers, this sector, who, were particularly disadvantaged or had their lives disrupted by that.
We've seen a lot about or heard a lot about the Great Resignation. How has that affected? And is that something that you're seeing in this particular area and in the service sector?
Well, since way before the pandemic, there was just a huge amount of turnover in the service sector, which is costly for employers. And it's not great for workers either to experience spells of unemployment and to have that instability in their lives. So we see a lot of churn in these industries because the work conditions are really challenging to sustain over time. If you're not getting much pay, if you have meager benefits, and you're also asked to put your whole life on hold and be at the beck and call of your employer, it's really hard to sustain that. So many workers just can't always make it work.
And what are the implications for family life? You mentioned the unpredictability of the work schedules. How has that played out? Because I believe that's something you have looked into as well.
Absolutely. The implications for family life are many. They're pervasive. So if you just put yourself in the shoes of a worker who doesn't know whether you have to work tomorrow or not, you can't make any other plans. And if you've held your schedule open and available and then you're not called in, you're also not paid. And so you can't make ends meet. And so the Shift project has been very focused on tracing the many, many consequences of these work conditions. And you just see across the board all sorts of spillover effects. And to give some examples, we see that children experience far more instability in their child care arrangements when their parents have these erratic schedules. We see that children's school absences go up when parents' schedules are changed at the last minute. And we see children's behavioral problems escalate when parents have to face this routine instability.
And this isn't a new phenomenon. Is that correct, Dr. Harknett? The appeal of this part-time scheduling by employers, this is something that dates back decades and has evolved since that time. How has the situation changed for these workers?
You're right to highlight that this is not new, that this has been around for a while, and that employers rely really heavily on this just-in-time scheduling, which is great for an employer because they are paying the bare minimum in terms of their labor costs, but it's pretty terrible for workers and their families. And what was striking during the pandemic is how little changed in terms of these just-in-time scheduling practices. At a time when we were all facing so much uncertainty during the pandemic, these workers day to day, week to week, continued to not know whether or how much they were going to work.
And the two things that, headline the state of the economy right now are, we're told that unemployment is at record lows and inflation is getting to be a very serious problem. I'm getting from you that these particular shift workers are being disadvantaged when it comes to both of those categories.
They are definitely multiply disadvantaged. Although we have seen a little bit of wage growth, we've seen very little movement in other crucial dimensions of job quality. Many workers don't have paid sick leave during a pandemic, which can be catastrophic for all of us. And the schedules are really challenging. It's a day-to-day challenge.
Do you see any cause for optimism going forward? We talk a lot about the fact that jobs do seem readily available. Unemployment is quite low. Is there just a mismatch, or is the churn that you're now seeing allowing for people to actually move to different positions at this point?
Well, it really remains to be seen, because I think you highlighted a couple of potential pathways. On the one hand, employers could continue to treat workers as disposable. And if workers can't handle the poor conditions, the employers will just try to find other workers to replace them with. But on the other hand, this really could be a moment where workers have some more bargaining power, and some cause for optimism can be found from the success of local policies that are trying to rein in these just-in-time schedules. So the SHIFT project evaluated a fair work week policy in Seattle and found that it really made a difference in workers' lives. It meant that they got more notice of their work schedules. They were less likely to experience those disruptive last-minute changes. And what's more, we found that after that law was passed, workers in Seattle were sleeping better. They were happier, and they were experiencing fewer material hardships. So we have some policy levers that we know can work, but those kinds of laws only exist in a few different cities. There is some federal legislation that's been proposed, the Schedules That Work Act, which has been championed by Senator Elizabeth Warren and Representative Rosa DeLauro. And so if something like that were to pass at the federal level, I think it could make a huge difference in giving workers some predictability.
What about, though, from the private sector side? Do you see any kinds of changes and reactions, really, to the fact that there may not be this disposable workforce going forward?
We definitely, so one of the benefits of the SHIFT project is we are able to compare and contrast across different employers who are working in the same subsector. So we can compare Costco to Target to Walmart. We can compare McDonald's to In-N-Out Burger or Burger King. And what we see is that employers do make different choices. Although overall, the service sector is a pretty tough place to work. Some employers offer better conditions than others. No, it tends to be the exception rather than the rule. But one company that hasn't gotten a lot of attention, IKEA, offers their workers schedule notice and tends to offer more schedule stability and better pay than many of their competitors. And their workers have that more stability that they can rely on. But the bad news is that when we leave it up to the employers to choose whether to offer more predictability or to use on-call scheduling or to treat workers like, like a material that you can just plug in at the last minute, more are choosing the unstable practices than the stable ones. So we do see some good actors, but I think overall, we see that conditions are pretty poor.
And there has to be some kind of broad-based policy change in order to address these issues.
Yes, I think that conclusion is absolutely correct. If we leave it up to employers, we'll see a few kind of rise to the top as high road employers, but the majority are not going to do it unless their arms are twisted or they're required to do so.
This is certainly a topic that we will want to check back with you on in the coming months, and hopefully not the coming years. Hopefully there will be an improvement. But we want to thank you, Dr. Kristen Harknett, Professor of Sociology at University of California, San Francisco, for joining us today. Thank you, Dr. Harknett.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, so now the fun fact of the week, which is obviously my highlight of the week. And I want to share with you some of the stuff that we dug out from the poll by Lewis Harrison Associates from 1973, archived by our friends at the Roper Center at Cornell University. And this has to do with prices and talk about inflation. Let's take a look at some of these kind of numbers.
I'm not sure how fun this is, Lee.
This is depressing.
For me, I remember 1973, so I can actually, I'm going to give you the numbers, but things are a lot cheaper too. I don't know. So anyway, let's get into the numbers. How about concert or opera? What is the highest ticket price charged for those events in your area? Highest ticket prices that they got for concerts or opera, and the average was $10.10.
Whoa.
Yeah. So jump in with that. I went to a Paul McCartney concert about 5 years ago at Yankee Stadium, and that wouldn't have gotten me parking.
Well, I believe you also put together an inflation calculator for us as well. And I'm not sure how well that works, because maybe it's just the fact that these are average prices as well. And, we live in the Northeast, which has, and New York, which has a significantly, higher standard of living, which means we pay more for everything than anybody else, from, cars to milk. But I was struck by the fact that the comparable amount of money would be $63.95 now.
Which does get you parking, but it doesn't get you a front row seat to anything.
And of course, I'm always struck by the fact that when we look at housing prices, particularly now where we are in this boom, where the supply is low, the interest in purchasing homes is extremely high. Apparently, in 1973, Lee, you found that you could buy a house for $27,500.
When are we building the time machine? Somebody tell me, please.
Can you get a car? Can you get a new car for that?
I don't know how many tires, but you can get a new car. But what's funny about that is not too many years later than that, I guess in the late 70s, I bought my first house at $39,500. So it sold for a lot more, and the numbers do change. But you have to think about salaries and whether cost of living is whether salaries and wages are keeping pace with the cost of living increases and just the pure inflation. And unfortunately for a lot of folks, it is not. And that therein lies the unfun fact about these kind of dramatic numbers. I remember in college, I was working the switchboard as a part-time job during this period.
Oh God, did anybody ever get any of those calls?
None. But it was okay because they probably weren't there in their rooms anyway. But anyway, $1.05 an hour in those days. So that didn't go too far either.
Well, I have 3 young children, so I shudder to think of what the ticket prices are going to be like when they become teenagers and asked to go to their first concert. So I think I'm going to have to start saving up now and maybe taking out a loan based on the inflation calculator.
Yeah.
Well, I think they actually have a favorite thing to do, right? The wrestling, what is it called? The Friday night SmackDown.
I have no comment. I can't even go there.
I'm sorry. Didn't mean to out the boys.
Well,
but
my favorite,
I suspect that that gets mom to the credit card pretty quickly.
Yeah, my favorite thing is, of course, going to Yankee Stadium. And when I was a kid growing up, I think the box seats reserves were $2.50 and the box seats were $3.25. And again, not a hot dog today.
Well, unfortunately, I think we may be facing another inflationary period, and all that does is it eats up wages. and makes it very difficult to people to obtain not only the things they want, but the necessities as well. So we're talking, concert prices, but it affects everything all around.
Well, is there any chance we can get next week a really pure fun fact?
It's your fun fact, Lee. Come
I know.
on.
Well, I'm gonna really push hard.
Well, I think this was actually a very appropriate fact for today.
We'll leave it there then.
That'll do it for Poll Hub this week.
Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer.
Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
The Poll Hub team includes Ashley Marcinek, Athen Hollis, and Emily Fry.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review. Positive reviews help other listeners like you find us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal.
If you have questions for us, tweet them directly to @MaristPoll.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub, and with any luck, it'll cooperate.
Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button.
Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as it's released.
We'll see you next time.